think my generation is the last generation to know that before her solo career, Gwen Stefani was actually in a band. Pretty good one, that is. I mean, they kind of mixed ska in with pop and some sort of rock, and later using synths and all this kind of stuff. It was just very interesting, and it makes me feel like this meme right here. And with that said band, no doubt, reuniting once again, I wanted to take a look at their 6 studio albums and rank them from worst to best. Now keep in mind, this is just my opinion. Obviously my rating is going to be different from yours. You know, there's just some of their albums that I don't mess with as much as their others, and just because it may be a little bit lower on the list, that doesn't mean I hate it. Maybe it's just one of their albums that I don't go back to as often, but it's still got some bops on it. So without further ado, let's start out with what I think is their worst album. So when this album came out, I was a freshman in high school, and I was actually kind of excited for this one. No Doubt is back. First album since Rocksteady in 2001, 11 years. And what we got was just kind of this mismatch of nothing. It was No Doubt trying to be in with the times rather than doing what worked and surprising us with other things. It was way too techno for my liking. The features weren't great. There was beat drops that just didn't feel like they belonged. All in all, this is the only No Doubt album I would say that doesn't feel like No Doubt. It felt like Gwen Stefani was just trying to put what worked well in her solo pop career and throw it into the band, and just kind of have No Doubt there just so they can say they had a reunion album. I don't know. I don't think there's anything off in this album that I've liked and gone back to since it's come out, and to be honest, I always kind of forget that it just exists. Next, we have their 1992 debut self-titled record. See, with ska music for me, I do enjoy some of it, but there are some times where it just gets a little annoying, a little repetitive at times, and this is No Doubt when they were like heavy into the ska stuff. Like that was their sound, and they were just going with it. Trumpets galore. If you like trumpets, this record is for you. There's some good songs on here, especially Trapped in a Box being the only single from this record, and it is pretty weird for people who don't necessarily know what to expect from the band. Gwen Stefani using kind of more higher pitched vocals to sing, and sometimes it doesn't even sound like her, but for the most part it's what you would expect from a debut album that didn't do good from a band that would eventually become big. It just kind of passed under the rug. People go back and go, I wonder why this didn't get more recognition, but at the same point in time it was No Doubt really still trying to find their sound, whereas this was straight ska. They didn't necessarily start mixing stuff into the sound that they had until later albums, and that's why this one is a very hit or miss record for me, because with all the good songs that come on it, there's always a bad song or two that follow it. Next is one, I don't know how much hate I'm gonna get for this, if at all, but 2000's Return of Saturn is just not one of my favorites. I mean, yeah, the song Ex-Girlfriend is good, I do like that, but to me, this album has some of the weaker singles from their newer albums. I get the idea was to go a little bit more softer for this particular record in general, as Gwen Stefani was just kind of writing a lot about heartbreak and stuff like that, but I don't know, it just doesn't have that same oomph as other No Doubt albums have. Like I said, it's got the one big single off of it, but then everything else is just kind of there, and you can see why they followed this album up so quick once we get to the record that follows. But this one, it's definitely better than the debut, and definitely better than Push and Shove, but I just don't necessarily think this would be where I would tell someone to start with No Doubt if they were trying to get into them. I'd kind of be like, they have their big albums and then you want to go into these, because with this one, I think you just have to have a certain taste and be in a certain mood to listen to it. Otherwise, you're just not going to get a lot of enjoyment out of it. Plus, too, I think the departure of Gwen Stefani's brother Eric also had a lot to do with this turn, but at the same point in time. Who knows, maybe they were planning it beforehand and him leaving was just, you know, kind of happened in the middle of it. Next is their hit, popular 1995 album, The Beacon Street Collection. Probably don't know this one. Most people probably don't. This one was made kind of during the recording process for the debut album, and a lot of this was stuff that was left off of that record. They released this one, it says through Beacon Street, but from what I heard, mostly they wrote a lot of this stuff while they were still independent. They do have a song called Total Hate 95, which features Bradley Nowell of Sublime, so again, that just kind of shows you how into the ska thing they were doing. But what makes this album more interesting is you get a lot more, you know, darker bass riffs and guitar riffs to go along with it. It's almost like No Doubt's starting to realize, like, hey, you know, mixing this stuff in with our current ska sound, it's kind of working. It's starting to become enjoyable, and it's an underrated record as it is. I mean, it's only 10 songs and whatnot, so it's not like their other albums where, you know, you definitely get a lot that you bargained for. This album's just kind of quick, 40 minutes, come and go, but for the most part, it's one that I would recommend to people because of how much I think it just kind of came and went, and because nobody really was giving this band any sort of like doubt that, oh yeah, you're gonna become big. It was just like, okay, throw these, what I'm assuming were like B-sides or just left off tracks, call it an album, make it your second album, that way you can get signed to a record label, and then eventually that big album will come. All the boys say, hey baby, hey baby, hey. Girls say, girls say. But we are not there yet. Oh no, no, no. We're gonna talk about Return of Saturn's follow-up, 2001's Rocksteady. This is when the band kind of didn't necessarily ditch the ska sound, but they went in a completely different direction. They hit the ball into left field, and fans weren't ready for it. But to be honest with you, some of their classics are on here. I mean, Hey Baby, Hella Good, Underneath It All, those three songs are bangers in itself. A lot of this stuff has to do with Gwen Stefani and her at the time relationship with Bush's Gavin Rossdale. The lyrics kind of, you know, play into that a lot. It's just one of those ones where I, you know, commended them this late in their career for taking that different direction, because if they would have kept bringing out the same stuff that they were before, I feel like it would have got repetitive and annoying and people would have got tired of them. But when people were hearing these new songs, it was like, oh, okay, we got like a upbeat song and Hella Good and Hey Baby, and then Underneath It All kind of sticks in that ska direction, but, you know, is also a little bit softer and pop leaning. So it basically was when No Doubt kind of became an audience for just about anyone, whereas their, you know, early albums, it was like, okay, a certain group of people, they did have a couple songs get through the mainstream, but that was about it. But with this record, it was like, get ready for takeoff because No Doubt is here. Sadly, this would be their last album until 2012, but for the most part, at least it was a good one. And now look, I didn't want to be obvious for my number one choice, but what other No Doubt album would you put at the number one spot for their best album of all time? It's gotta be Tragic Kingdom. Which, like Beacon Street Collection, came out in 1995, 7 months after to be exact. They are now with this big record label, and they have finally found their sound, and they just released what I think is an album that they were never going to beat in terms of how historic and how great it was. To kick it off with Spiderwebs, go into Excuse Me Mister, to what I like to call more ska punk leaning track in Just a Girl, to, you know, Hey You, Sunday Morning, Don't Speak. I mean, there's just so many classics on here, and the deep cuts hit differently than any other albums. This just whole album from start to finish, it's an hour long, but you find yourself not wanting to skip anything or barely skipping anything at all. There might be one song that you're like, I'm not feeling this, but the rest of the album, man, this is it. And this was No Doubt at their best. But as we know, a lot of turmoil hit, you know, toward this period. They would take a while to follow up this album, and then they kind of started to experiment after that. But this was the one where you can say the band found their true sound, they made it work, and to this day, it's the band's most well-known album for good reason. I mean, what, Don't Speak has like 1 billion views on YouTube at this point? Like, it's just ridiculous. So anyway, that is my list. for the 6 No Doubt albums, ranking them from worst to best. Would really like to hear in the comments below, what do you think? Because I've only ever been around for 3 of these albums. The first 2, Return of Saturn and Rocksteady, came out when I was younger. But, you know, growing up, I heard it through parents and uncles and aunts and just grew really, really attached. So No Doubt has been a part of my life for a long, long time. But maybe people who were around when Tragic Kingdom and the other albums came out, or were a little older when Rocksteady and whatnot came out, maybe they have a different view of it for other reasons and they can remember it more than I can. But, you know, again, our opinions are going to differ, and that's just fine. But that's it for me. Stay safe out there, and I will catch you all in the next one.